Hello everyone, welcome to Sinister Prime. Since many of you listen to these stories to relax and drift off into dreams, I thought it would be wonderful to hear where you're tuning in from around the world. Let's begin the story. It was the summer of 2005, and we were a tight-knit group of 7, just out of high school and eager to make the most of our last free summer before college. There was me, Sam, my best friend Jake, always the joker, his girlfriend Alyssa, the twins Nina and Nikki, the quiet, brooding Max, and Beth, who I'd secretly had a crush on since middle school. We lived in Dunwich, a small, quiet town where everyone knew everyone. It wasn't the kind of place where you expected anything terrible to happen. The most exciting thing we had planned was a weekend camping trip to the outskirts of town, near an old abandoned sawmill. The sawmill was a relic of the past, a decaying monument to the town's history. But to us, it was just a cool place to explore and tell ghost stories. The day started like any other summer day. We gathered our supplies, loaded up Jake's beat-up van, and set off, laughing and singing along to the radio. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. It felt like nothing could go wrong. The campsite, around noon. The sawmill loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the bright sky. We set up our tents and gathered firewood, the excitement of the day bubbling within us. As evening approached, we lit a fire and sat around it, roasting marshmallows and telling spooky stories. The atmosphere was perfect, the kind of night you wish could last forever. That's when we heard it, a low, distant rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. At first we thought it was just an animal, or maybe some old machinery from the sawmill. But then it grew louder, unmistakably the roar of a chainsaw. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to laugh it off as a prank or some overzealous neighbor cutting firewood. But the sound kept coming closer, and our laughter died down. Jake, ever the brave one, stood up. "Let's go check it out," he said, grabbing a flashlight. "Are you crazy?" Alyssa hissed, grabbing his arm. "It's probably nothing." But curiosity got the better of us, and we all reluctantly agreed to follow Jake. We made our way through the dense forest, the chainsaw's roar growing louder with each step. The moon cast an eerie glow over the trees, and shadows danced around us, making everything feel more sinister. As we neared the sawmill, the noise stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was almost worse than the sound. We stood there, frozen, our breaths shallow and hearts pounding. Then we saw him, a hulking figure standing in the doorway of the sawmill, illuminated by the moonlight. He wore a stained, tattered apron and a grotesque mask that looked like it was made from human skin. In his hands, he held a chainsaw, its blade gleaming menacingly. We all gasped, unable to move or speak. The man stared at us for what felt like an eternity, and then he revved the chainsaw to life, the deafening roar breaking the silence. That's when panic set in. We turned and ran, our screams echoing through the forest. In the chaos, we got separated. I found myself running with Beth and Max, the trees whipping past us in a blur. We could still hear the chainsaw behind us, but I couldn't tell how close it was. We stumbled upon an old cabin, hidden among the trees, and dashed inside, slamming the door behind us. The cabin was dark and musty, filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. We huddled together, trying to catch our breath and come up with a plan. "We have to find the others," Beth whispered, her voice trembling. "How?" Max replied, his eyes wide with fear. "That maniac is out there, and we don't even know where they are. Before we could figure anything out, we heard a noise outside. The chainsaw had stopped, replaced by heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. We held our breath, praying he wouldn't find us. But the footsteps grew closer, and then there was a loud crash as the door was kicked open. The man stood there, his grotesque mask glaring at us. Max, in a desperate act of bravery, lunged at him, trying to wrestle the chainsaw away. But the man was too strong. He shoved Max aside like a rag doll and advanced on us. Beth screamed, and I grabbed a rusty pipe from the floor, swinging it with all my might. I managed to hit him on the arm, and he let out a growl of pain, but it only seemed to enrage him further. He grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground, squeezing so hard I could barely breathe. Just as I thought I was going to pass out, Max recovered and tackled him from behind. The man dropped me, and I hit the floor, gasping for air. Max yelled for us to run, and Beth and I scrambled to our feet, rushing out the door. We ran blindly through the forest, our only thought to get as far away as possible. We could hear Max's screams behind us, but we didn't dare look back. The night seemed endless, every shadow a potential threat, every sound making us jump. Eventually, we stumbled upon a road. By some miracle, a car was passing by, and we flagged it down, desperate for help. The driver, an older man named Mr. Willis, took one look at our terrified faces and let us in without question. We babbled incoherently about the man with the chainsaw, and he nodded grimly, saying he'd heard stories about a crazy old man living near the sawmill, but no one had ever believed them. He drove us straight to the police station, where we told our story again. The officers were skeptical at first, but when we insisted they check the sawmill, they finally agreed. They sent a few patrol cars out while we waited, our nerves frayed and bodies exhausted. Hours passed before they returned. They found the sawmill deserted, no sign of the man or Max. They searched the area thoroughly, but came up with nothing. It was like he had vanished into thin air, taking Max with him. The next few days were a blur of interviews, searches, and sleepless nights. The town was in shock, and rumors spread like wildfire. Some people believed our story, while others thought it was a prank gone wrong. But for us, it was all too real. Beth and I couldn't stay in Dunwich after that. The memories were too painful, the fear too overwhelming. We moved away, trying to start new lives, but the trauma followed us. I still have nightmares about that night, and Beth and I drifted apart over the years, unable to cope with what we'd been through. Jake, Alyssa, Nina, and Nikki were never found either. It's as if they vanished without a trace, swallowed up by the forest. Some say the man with the chainsaw is still out there, waiting for his next victims. Others think it's just a ghost story, a cautionary tale for kids who wander too far from home. But I know the truth. I can still hear the chainsaw in my dreams, the sound of Max's screams echoing in my mind. Dunwich may have moved on, but for those of us who lived through that night, the horror never ended. In the years that followed, I tried to move on, but every summer brought back the memories, as vivid as ever. I found solace in writing, trying to purge the darkness by putting it on paper. But no matter how much I wrote, the fear remained. One summer, nearly a decade after that fateful night, I returned to Dunwich. I needed closure, a way to confront my past and maybe, just maybe, put it to rest. The town hadn't changed much, still the same quiet, unassuming place it had always been. I visited the old sawmill, now cordoned off and overgrown with weeds. Standing there, I felt a chill run down my spine. The memories flooded back, and I could almost hear the chainsaw again, see the man's grotesque mask leering at me. I wasn't alone. A man stood near the entrance, staring at the sawmill. He looked familiar, but it wasn't until he turned and I saw the scar across his face that I recognized him. "Max?" I whispered, disbelief washing over me. He nodded, his eyes hollow and haunted. "I knew you'd come back eventually," he said, his voice rough and broken. We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of the past heavy between us. Finally, I asked, "What happened that night? How did you survive?" Max took a deep breath, the pain of the memories clear on his face. "After you and Beth ran, he knocked me out. I woke up in the sawmill, tied up. I thought I was going to die, but then he just left. I don't know why. Maybe he thought I was dead. I managed to get free and ran. I've been running ever since." The revelation was staggering. Max had survived, but he'd been living in fear, haunted by the same nightmares that plagued me. "We need to end this," I said, a determination I hadn't felt in years rising within me. "We need to find him and make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Max agreed, and together we planned our return to the sawmill. We gathered supplies and made a pact that this time we wouldn't run. We would face the man with the chainsaw and put an end to the terror that had haunted us for so long. The night we chose was eerily similar to that night 10 years ago. The moon was full, casting an otherworldly glow over the forest. As we approached the sawmill, the memories came rushing back, but I pushed them aside. This time, I was ready. We entered the sawmill, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The place was exactly as I remembered, decayed and abandoned, the air thick with the scent of rot and old wood. We moved cautiously, every creak and groan of the building setting our nerves on edge. Then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of a chainsaw roaring to life. Our flashlights flickered, and the man appeared, just as terrifying as before. But this time, we were ready. Max and I stood our ground, determined not to let fear control us. The man lunged at us, the chainsaw swinging wildly. We dodged and attacked, using the environment to our advantage. It was a brutal struggle, the air filled with the sound of metal clashing and our grunts of effort. But we fought with a desperation born of years of terror, and finally, we overpowered him. We stood over his fallen form, the chainsaw now silent. I reached down and pulled off his mask, revealing a face twisted by anger and madness. He was just a man, not the monster of our nightmares, but a man who had let his darkness consume him. The authorities took him away, and the sawmill was finally shut down for good. The town of Dunwich began to heal, the scars of the past slowly fading. Max and I found some measure of peace, knowing that we had faced our fears and come out the other side. But the memories never completely faded. They lingered, a reminder of the darkness that can exist in the most unexpected places. And every summer, when the nights are long and the air is thick with the scent of pine, I can still hear the faint echo of a chainsaw, a ghostly reminder of the nightmare we survived.